All right, well, thank you everyone for coming to the panel, Furthering the Movement to Stop Mass Incarceration. I'm Gregory Koger. This is the first time I've been at a Guild convention, mainly because I've been behind enemy lines, locked down behind the walls of this racist-ass, illegitimate system that we have in the prison cells. I want to briefly introduce the panelists here, and this can be pretty informal, and then we're just going to jump in and have, about 10-ish minutes presentations, and then we want to have discussion, debate, criticism. You tell us we're totally fucking wrong, brainstorming, what do we actually have to do to end this nationwide? And this is part of the month of resistance, October month of resistance, organized by the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. So without further ado, to my right, physically and not politically, is Mark Lewis Taylor, who's the Maxwell M. Upson Professor of Theology and Culture at Princeton Theological Seminary. He's written a number of books. He's the founder of Educators for Mumia Abu-Jamal, Free Mumia, motherfuckers, and he will be speaking from his perspective. Next to him is Brother Hannibal Salim Ali, brother I've worked a lot with, who's also been behind enemy lines, spent a lot of time in prison himself, was at the April strategy meeting for the Stop Mass Incarceration Network in New York, where we collectively crafted the call for the month of resistance, which I think people, if you haven't seen it previously, is available for people. And his nephew, Antistine Hunter, was killed by the police in Tennessee. To his right, again, physically and not politically, is Brian Orozco, who's an NLG member, a lawyer. You're on the Chicago Guild board, and someone who's worked quite a bit with prisoners and their families, both in California and in this state. And welcome, everyone. So let me jump straight into this. I just got back from Ferguson, Missouri, where people know there's been a historic uprising of hundreds and hundreds of people who, in the face of the execution of Mike Brown, an unarmed 18-year-old black youth, walking while black, executed by police officer Darren Wilson a couple weeks ago, people stood up like they haven't stood up in many decades. And they brought this issue to the entire world. And without these folks in Ferguson standing up, and very specifically the youth who live under the gun of the new Jim Crow, who stood up and said, we are not going to live like this anymore. We refuse to be silent. We refuse to take this abuse and racist prosecutions that we face every single day in this city. And they actually brought Mike Brown's murder and its interconnections with the entirety of the new Jim Crow and the systemic, integral racism and white supremacy of this system to the eyes of the world. And that battle is not over. It's far from over. Even though they've come out with police repression on a scale that we have not seen in this country in quite some time, with this militarized police force, tear gassing, totally peaceful protests. Not that there weren't some things that people might not completely think is the best objective of people doing out there, but that is not the main point. The people stood up. They were defiantly protesting. Guys in street organizations who literally on the morning before Mike Brown was executed were beefing with each other. That same night, were standing shoulder to shoulder next to each other against this racist beast of police militarized force that was gassing them and women, children, mothers, etc. For what? For demanding an end to this shit. So Ferguson was really important. And I do want to point to another recent example that actually people may have heard about, the California prison hunger strike, which last summer, started in 2011. There were several rounds of them. I'm sure there are people in this audience who supported that. I myself supported it in every round of hunger strike. And in fact, last summer I spent 2 weeks on hunger strike in Cook County Jail in solidarity with those brothers, among doing other things. And that hunger strike ended a year ago yesterday. So I just want to give a salute to those brothers who stood up on that hunger strike. And I raise these things both because these are manifestations of resistance that brought this to the attention of the world. Prisoners, brothers in Pelican Bay, a security housing unit, torture, isolation, who forced the New York Times to write an op-ed saying their struggle is just. This has to end. You know, that does not happen very often in this society, and it needs to happen a whole lot more. And that's what this month of resistance, the October 2014 month of resistance to mass incarceration, police terror, repression, and the criminalization of a generation, has to put on a whole other level in society. And before I go to that, maybe give a little flavor of some of my own background, because I spent over 6 years straight in solitary confinement in Illinois prisons myself. You know, I was serving a 20-year sentence in an adult maximum security prison when I was 17 years old. And it was under those conditions where I found myself with millions of other youth collectively across this country, youth and others, principally Black and Latino, that I began to question, why is this happening? Why am I here? Why are all these other guys here and women who all too often are not even talked about in this analysis of mass incarceration? And I apologize that this panel does not adequately reflect what's happening to women in prison, which is far underspoken about. You know, but it was in those conditions that I first began to confront what this is really about. And during my time in solitary confinement, I took up revolutionary theory, began to actually learn a lot about the history of this country. For instance, I'm sure people are very, very familiar with Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, integral to me beginning to take up a much more class analysis about this system. And I actually met Revolution newspaper while I was in solitary confinement, thanks to the work of the Prisoners Revolutionary Literature Fund, and came out and dedicated my life to ending the injustices of capitalism and imperialism, and actually struggling for a radically different world for all humanity. So that's a little bit of my background. And so I want to give a little bit of a flavor of what the month of resistance needs to look like. And we don't have all this worked out. We don't have all the answers. But we do know that there is a crying, overdue, dire need for there to be nationwide, organized, coordinated resistance to stop mass incarceration. And that is absolutely the vision of the month of resistance that was initiated by Dr. Cornel West and Carl Dix, who are the two co-founders of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. So this month has a number of contours that really, the objective of this is to repolarize things in society. Ferguson has actually been a tremendous example of putting this out in a whole other level, and this is interconnected. Mass incarceration, police terror, school-to-prison pipeline, the repression of immigrants, children coming here, refugees, where you have these racist vigilantes and you know, functionaries of the system, almost to a T, who are demonizing these youth, who are only coming here because of the depredations of U.S. imperialism on Latin America and around the world. You know, you have, as I mentioned, women in prison, shackled to beds and forced to give birth to children that they do not want or have the resources to take care of. Women in Tutwiler Prison in Alabama who have to sell their bodies to guards to get tampons and toilet paper. You know, we could go on, and I know people have some familiarity with these outrages, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time pontificating and being outraged about the specifics of them, because we actually have to be organized. So this month of resistance is actually meant to repolarize things in society, to both bring forward those who live under the gun of this, but also for people from other sections of society who do know something about, or who should know something about, what's happening with mass incarceration and police terror, and who can be won to stand on the side of the most oppressed and speak out and stand with them in defiant acts of protest, in symposiums and teach-ins and campuses and high schools, you know, in religious faith leaders having not just, but specifically at the beginning of the month, led up by Reverend Jerome McCory from Dayton, Ohio, who works with the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, an entire weekend of sermons in the faith community, in mosques, synagogues, and churches, religious leaders calling on their congregations that they have to be part of this fight and be part of ending mass incarceration. You know, I mentioned the teach-ins, symposium, panels, speak-outs on campuses, universities, high schools, elementary schools, frankly, anywhere where young folks who are in this pipeline can be spoken to and brought into the discussion with people from other sections of society, like more middle-class college students who need to know about this and need to be on the side of those people. You know, there have to be cultural events that include artwork from prisoners, spoken word pieces, musical artists, you know, speaking out on this issue. And we, again, saw some manifestations of that around Ferguson. We've seen a lot of manifestations about that in the hip-hop community around Palestine and the vicious, illegitimate assault on Gaza that, you know, may still be ongoing in some ways, but has been extremely intense over the last several weeks. You know, all of that has to be part of this. You know, plays, you know, guerrilla theater in the streets, outside of prisons, you know, mock shoes, some of which has gone down with the California prison hunger strike and other things, to actually visualize to people the reality of what people face under this system. You know, October 22nd is the National Day of Protest to stop police brutality, repression, and criminalization of a generation. This year is, I'm sad to say, the 19th annual, and Mark Lewis Taylor was involved in the founding of that in 1996, I believe. And he can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But this is the 19th annual year, and October 22nd is extremely important, especially in the changed environment that we're in now, both nationally and internationally, due to the righteous, courageous, defiant resistance of particularly the youth and others in Ferguson. But look, this has to happen on a whole other level. People have to be in the streets across the country on October 22nd, finding very creative ways to manifest this. You know, I know in this city, there's a number of alternative high schools that we work with who almost every year sends a busload of students to October 22nd. Well, there needs to be busloads from across this city of students coming out. There needs to be campuses bringing contingents. The National Lawyers Guild needs to have a contingent of lawyers and legal workers and law students out in the streets. I love the legal observers. That's an extremely important aspect of, you know, both withstanding repression and documenting it, but there also have to be folks in the Guild who are on the front lines, stepping out as political actors. And I know I'm not trying to pit that in contradiction to the important work that everybody does here on a daily basis. I know there are people in this Guild who are committed to what drew me to the Guild itself, the notion that private property should not be more sacrosanct than human rights. That's bullshit. That's built into this capitalist system. And I will say, you know, this whole system is illegitimate. This country was founded on slavery and the genocide of the native peoples. It was born in blood. 3/5 of a human being for black folks was written into the Constitution. So this system has no redeeming qualities. There is no reforming this system. And again, this is my personal views. I'm a revolutionary and a communist. People in Stop Mass Incarceration Network and people that need to be part of this month of resistance do not all agree on the necessity for revolution, but it will take revolution, nothing less, to get rid of this. And anything short of that is not going to fully address the systematic, built-in white supremacy, oppression, patriarchy, imperialism of this system. And I would encourage people who actually do want to learn more about the strategy for revolution, that the organization that I support as a part of the Revolutionary Communist Party, they should come out on November 15th to an important dialogue between Cornel West and Baba Bakian, Revolution and Religion, the fight for emancipation and the role of religion, which is happening in New York City. But that's what I'm about, and that's why I'm a part of this month of resistance. This whole system has to be taken down. The basis exists for humanity to live on, everyone on this planet to have food, clothing, shelter, and education, to be engaged in intellectual and artistic pursuits, to have a life worthy of human beings. That does not happen on this planet for one reason, because we have a global economic and political system of capitalism and imperialism that is based on the private appropriation of socially created wealth. And until we get rid of that, humanity will never be free, and we have to do that. And so the month of resistance is absolutely one of the key concentrations of social contradiction that is actually the pathway to unleashing a movement in this country that both takes on mass incarceration millions of youth enmeshed in a system that considers them criminal and that has no future for the youth, due both to the economic developments of capitalism and imperialism, where there are no jobs in this country, and I'm not faulting people abroad for trying to get jobs, but they are exploited even more than people here. That's what happened out in the 1960s. They sent these jobs, de-industrialized the cities, first to the suburbs and then out across the world where they could exploit people in sweatshops. That shit has to end too. But also, there's the political resistance of the 1960s, which we're seeing a glimpse, a resurgence, a new movement of, starting in Ferguson, starting behind enemy lines in these prison cells, that needs to go to an entirely other level. That is what the authorities, the rulers of this system, the ruling class, brought into being with mass incarceration. It's meant to be political repression. It's meant to stop another generation of youth the system has no future for from stepping forward and demanding a radically different world. So I'm going to end here and pass it over to Mark Lewis Taylor.
Thank you, everyone. Before I say why I support this month of resistance to stop mass incarceration that the network has put together, let me just say thanks to the NLG people. This is my first NLG convention, too. And yet I've worked with NLG people throughout the years on the movie Abu-Jamal work, political prisoners, and the struggle of all people to make a way towards liberation in this country, and one that is revolutionary. I myself have not been incarcerated, just detained, held briefly for 3 protest actions, but I've always appreciated seeing the NLG folk around planning how to take the next steps from that detention and what have you. I've spent my 25 to 30 years largely teaching and doing research, working with students, bridging between the classroom and social movements of liberation, although it should be stressed that right in the classroom there is a site of struggle to be had, since our universities, especially the Ivy League university in which I teach, but most of the universities today are becoming ever more imperialized, ever more servants of the neoliberal class agenda. We've been fighting that through Educators for Mumia Abu-Jamal, through the firing of Professor Tony Montero from the African American Studies Department at Temple University, where gentrification, university-led gentrification, is going full tilt. My major areas of work have been in prison activism ever since investigating prisoner rights in the 1970s, and then watched the 7-fold increase of mass incarceration in this country since that time. I've also been at work, because of reasons for my youth in Latin America and Mexico that I won't go into, in solidarity with Latin American peoples and the continent that the U.S. keeps on lockdown, if I could use that word, reminiscent of both U.S. politics of repression and international politics. So those come together in informing my remarks today. I want to take 2 words from the long title of this Stop Mass Incarceration Network program: Stop Mass Incarceration, Police Terror, Repression, and the Criminalization of a Generation. The 2 words I want to foreground are terror, that word at the center that's attached to the word police, but actually I think attaches to all of those terms in a way. And then I want to look at the word stop and ask how we stop something like this. But the basic point I want to make could perhaps be introduced by engaging first in a comment on the New York Times, which a few weeks ago actually published an op-ed saying, "End mass incarceration." Did you see it a few weeks ago? Basically, their reasoning was a failure of utility. It doesn't work. In fact, makes things worse. They acknowledge that. What they did not say, and the point I want to stress today, is that mass incarceration is in fact a mode of illegitimate rule for our people. And that opposing it, as I said in my statement supporting this network project, opposing it will require a whole new approach to rule and people's democracy. That is basic to it. And the way I say what is particularly problematic about it is that stop mass incarceration, as well as police violence, is a mode of rule by terror. It is part of the system of state terror. And I try to get my students and others in the professional guilds who talk more abstractly about the issues of imprisonment, that what we are up against here is systematically organized state terror that is the way that rule is produced in this country today. hyperbolic or an exaggeration when applied to mass incarceration. I think we need to challenge that theme right away. I often like to quote a Rikers Island education administrator who said at one point about Rikers Island that, quote, the attractive lives some of us lead in the nice sections of New York would simply not be possible. If you want to get your outcasts out of sight, first you need a ghetto and then you need a prison to take pressure off the ghetto. Short-term, and listen to these words of hers, short-term terror and revulsion are more powerful than long-term wisdom or self-interest. Short-term terror. It's not hyperbole or exaggeration to use this term. But terror comes in two closely related forms that our system is organizing as a mode of rule today. First, there's what we saw in Ferguson and what you can see on U.S. battlefields, shock and awe. They use the term. You're to unsettle. You're to destroy the senses and sensibilities, make an overwhelming show of power that will disorient people. U.S. generals announced that's what they were going to do when they went into Iraq. Maybe you remember the speeches that CNN and all the rest covered. Police departments know full well that when they confront people on the streets, protesters or neighborhoods, when they do immigration raids, they use shock and awe tactics, okay? But there's a second mode of terror closely related to that, and you might call it the daily dread terror. It's a slower mode. It insinuates itself in the gut, somewhere between the gut and the sphincter muscles in communities, and is meant to lodge fear in people as a mode of rule. The shock and awe is related to it, but it is meant to have an after effect. It is meant to be a residue of the violence shown, so that if you protesters, as the youth have so valiantly been standing up, know well, you have to always go back and confront your memory of the shock and awe and the way it resides someplace in your gut and find a way. We all need to support ourselves in this to fight that fear. And some of us may be thinking when we hear about the shock and awe tactics, well, we feel that fear in our guts too, and it needs to be confronted there. But that is one of the modes of rule. Thomas Hobbes in his book Leviathan said that fear is the emotion to be reckoned with when ruling. And that's what we're up against big time in the United States today. Rule by terror. The prisons and immigration centers are examples of this, I think, not just police terror. Mass incarceration is a regime of state terror. And even some of my academic colleagues are beginning to talk about this, such as Dylan Rodriguez, one of the founders of the Critical Resistance Organization. The reigning ideology of our time speaks of prisons largely as punishing those guilty of crimes. But like it was some kind of timeout for folk. Like you send a child to a corner or something. It's not that. It's more like what Leonard Peltier said in his prison writings. It's time taking a bite out of you and submitting you to the vulnerability and to disintegration that prison guards and other forces are at work in extracting from you. Rikers Island in New York, Los Angeles County Jail, Cook County Jail here in Chicago. These institutions are not places that are a positive service to those cities and counties. They are part of the destruction of communities, particularly black and brown communities. See Todd Clear's book on how prisons make dispossessed communities worse. They do not make for safety for any of us. That's part of the lie. Rodriguez cites, just to get a sense of how deliberate the intentions are of this state as a mode of rule, Rodriguez cites radical attorney and legal theorist Jill Sophia Elijah, remembering way back to the 60s, hearing a speech by a certain professor that was given at a Bureau of Prisons conference. She recalls the meeting where Edward Schein actually recounted several techniques that he advocated that should be institutionalized in our prison. Let me read some of these. 1, physically remove the prisoner to an area sufficiently isolated in order to break or seriously weaken close emotional ties. 2, segregate all natural leaders. 3, prohibit group activities that do not fit brainwashing objectivities. 5, undermine all emotional supports. create a feeling of total abandonment and isolation from the community. And this meant prohibiting literature also that would also break the brainwashing process. And the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons at that time, Bennett, actually urged those conventioners to experiment with Dr. Shine's theories within their respective institutions. Now that's a rather forthright blueprint, but when you add to that the fundamentally violative conditions of our prisons, you have the creation of a system of terror. Marilyn Buck, one of the most eloquent of political prisoners, named punishment in the prisons as a policy of terror. Another professor, Ana Maria Oliviero, has pointed out that we include within terror obvious, often shock and awe things that make the news, but we forget the way our institutions inscribe and disseminate terror for people, a mode of fear. And by the way, to see one of the best commentaries on mass incarceration and fear, see the Columbia University law professor and critical theorist in his book Inferno, easy to remember. Maybe his last name is even easier to remember. It's Ferguson, Robert Ferguson. Just came out this year. I would really recommend it. He ends his book by saying, if officials with any shred of humanity had a real knowledge of what's going on in our prisons today, they would hardly be able to move because of deep shame. How we protect ourselves as professionals in teaching and the law and wherever else from that shame and from that knowledge, that's a story for another time, but it's a point that he develops. You might say we have something like a flashbang governance system. A flashbang grenade, was used, according to the St. Louis cops, for the first time in Ferguson. I think it's been used elsewhere. I know it's been used in immigration raids and drug arrests. It's essentially a grenade that's thrown in, and with a flash, it so destroys your vision for about 5 minutes, destroys your hearing, so that you hardly don't know which way to run. People in immigration raids have been killed by these since 1984. So in the youth police using this has gone on for a long time. But the idea of disorienting your people in order to rule them and to facilitate fear, this again is terror, and I think it needs to be stopped. So in closing, I think I have a few more minutes to wrap up. I want to comment, what would stopping mass incarceration look like? There are so many practices on the ground, people rising up, youth with new ideas, that I'm actually encouraged by what I'm seeing. I mean, I think the Stop Mass Incarceration Network idea is bringing a lot of those together. But let me just make 3 brief comments. One, it means ceasing to talk about mass incarceration as if it is just society's problems with imprisonment, deterrence, how to rehabilitate, how to incapacitate, as if we can reform it to make a little bit better. It has to be talked about, as I tried to begin today, as state terror, as a problem of rule, as something that violates our democracy and the dignity and spirit of all peoples. And that is remarkably different. It's a different framing. The second point I want to make is, know that those who rule desperately by flashbang governance, in consolidating state terror, they're afraid of us. They are afraid of the people who have dared to stand up in Ferguson, in New York City, in Chicago, and elsewhere. They are afraid of people's revolutionary change. And in fact, you could read, and I think there are strong arguments for this as I've checked with my historian friends, the rise of mass incarceration as a way to decimate those neighborhoods in which leaders like Fred Hampton, but many other unnamed ones too, the way leaders continually arise from communities of the racially stigmatized and repressed. It's a way to destroy those communities. That means that mass incarceration is a mode of fear expressed by ruling elites who are seeking to protect their military-backed economic privilege, that less than the 1% that the Occupy or decolonize movement so brought to the fore. Know that they're afraid of us. There was a White House memo back in the 60s when Martin Luther King threw in with the Vietnam movement at his famous Riverside Church address, a White House memo that said, well, Martin's thrown in with the Hanoi Hawks. And And they went even on to talk about the fear of overthrow that this might imply. As an African American threw in with white dissenters against war and the prospects of an Afro-Asian Chicana coalition that might really threaten governance. We need that kind of awareness that they are afraid of us. And so third, I want to say, as that moment showed that I just referenced, we need to build what I think is occurring also, our international consciousness here. We need to hold on to that beautiful moment when Gaza and Ferguson were somehow connected by hashtag. We need to hold on to the ways the resistance to war in Iraq and Afghanistan are part of our resistance to police violence and mass incarceration here. Because what was outed on the streets of Ferguson in terms of military police violence has been dished out in Gaza, in countries all across Latin America, as the U.S. protected its interests by those brutal means there. So we need to connect Ferguson to Korea, militarized Korea, still suffering war and division, to the legacy of Vietnam, to the future traumas of Syria and Iraq, and also Afghanistan. These connections make the powers tremble, and we need not be afraid. We are afraid. There's that place in our gut. I don't think we should deny it, but we have to confront it, and with collective power, throw back resistance to state terror. That's my basic word.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hannibal Salim Ali. I'm with Stop Mass Incarceration. I am a revolutionary Muslim, and what I would like to address here is to the criminalization process and the mindset of the public when it comes to viewing criminality and the person who has been labeled criminal. The criminal is one to whom an opprobrious label has been successfully attached. Labeling not only prescribes the behavior of others toward the one labeled criminal, or only negatively seeks to characterize him, it also tends to transform his self-concept and behavior in such ways that incarnates and substantiates the criminal appellation. Okay, so if a person is told over and over again that you're this, you're a criminal, or you're something negative, you know, they tend to believe that, you know, and it's not different, you know, with a human being. You know, we have a responsibility to look at ourselves and strive to be the best that we can be. You know, just because you come into contact with the law does not determine that that is the place you have to stay. You know, you can elevate out of that situation. You know, everyone should have the desire and the propensity in them to propel them forward to struggle against this system. This system is criminal because it allows, rather than the educating of the youth, you know, the perpetuation of criminal appellation, you know, the many ways in which to enhance criminality. What they fear is the revolution of the 60s, the youth, the camaraderie and togetherness that people showed, the strength that people showed. And they said that we'll not have this again. You know, so they brought drugs and guns in the community, targeted our youth, said we can't have clear-minded, functional, responsible people functioning in the community. So we're going to offset this with drugs. We don't own any guns. We don't own any poppy fields. Yet, they're in our communities constantly. I walk out my front door, you know, and there's SWAT teams, the police being busted and you wonder, how can you go about approaching this? In the neighborhood, they're driven on. The police drive on them with such aggression. You know, if you're being treated violent, it's in anyone's nature to holler, stop, help, something, you know, and they don't care. They'll beat you up right in front of your family. They'll put the handcuffs on you. They'll even kill you. They'll even kill you. Which happened to my nephew, Andy Hunter, in Memphis, Tennessee, that was shot 9 times by the police. The first 2 bullets in a gas station, the first 2 bullets hit him in the head. 7 bullets after that was just afterkill. 7 bullets. I mean, no warning shots, no tasers. Where are the preventative measures? Instead of just, you know, these gung-ho police, you know, with arms bearing down on our children. Are their lives any less sacred than anyone else in this room? All lives are sacred. All lives should be allowed to grow to reach the fullest potential that they are capable of. You know, but we have to impress. If you get nothing else from me today, it is imperative that we come against this system and make sure that they know that we're sending out the right message. This is incorrect. This is improper. No one, after you paid your debt to society, why do you still have a jacket, a criminal jacket over you? That person has paid his debt into society. He should be given his life back. He should be allowed to get a job and the things that are necessary to take care of their families. But they don't want this. They want to force recidivism. They want to force recidivism. They want us to respond in a negative way. Well, guess what? You're looking at a man that beat recidivism. 18 years free. So you don't have to be part of the problem. You can be a part of the solution. And we're here as agents of change to say we want to better this situation of criminality and the marketing of individuals as criminals who don't deserve it.
I gotta follow up these guys. Awesome. I guess what I want to talk about is fighting this movement from a legal perspective. As an attorney, and I just want to break up, this, what I'm about to say, into 3 parts. The problem, the avenues of change, whether it be through the legal system or the community, and what to look forward to next. So hopefully I'll stay with that. But we're looking at a huge problem here. I'm sure you're all well aware of this issue of mass incarceration. Just to give you a little snippet of this issue, I work at a civil rights firm, and we just filed a class action lawsuit at Cook County Jail. This is the largest jail in the United States. I mean, Los Angeles has the largest jail in terms of population, but Cook County Jail has the largest jail in terms of surface area, geography, right? We filed a class action lawsuit for pretrial detainees after they were processed. They had nowhere to put these guys. They had no beds, no cells. So what they had to do was put them in different holding cells and have them sleep on the floor. No beds, no pillows, no cushions, no toiletries, no showers, nothing, no food. For 5 days on end, because they had nowhere to put these guys. A group of 60 to 70 people. In the largest jail in the United States. I mean, this is just a snippet of the problem. It's just a huge influx of people. I mean, through different, factors, racism, the war on drugs, etc. But we have a huge influx of people being funneled into a system, and it is a form of state terror, and they're being treated like crap. That is the problem that we're facing right now. Now, I feel like one solution, the legal avenue. I was at a talk at the Philadelphia conference, NLG, and Paul Wright, the news editor, was speaking, and he was saying basically, a lot of people put emphasis on the legal system as the end-all be-all. If I as a prisoner can file a lawsuit, somehow, always my rights will be vindicted because this is the justice system. It's all about justice. He was saying, we got more done rioting and fucking protesting than we ever did with any lawsuits. Period. Some of the frustrations that we face as attorneys are that, in terms of the prisoner rights context, in 1997 there was a statute passed called the Prison Litigation Reform Act, and it basically made it 10 times harder for prisoners to litigate their own cases, or for even attorneys to litigate cases on their behalf. And one quick example that I don't want to get into like a legal seminar, so to speak, but one of the requirements for a prisoner to file a lawsuit in federal court is to exhaust administrative remedies, meaning that they have to do everything possible in prison to fix their problem. But the issue that the problem is the prison. They have to work within this unjust system to file a lawsuit to sue this system. Prison guards do everything in their power. Here in Illinois, there's a grievance system. You have to appeal to your counselor, a grievance officer, then it has to go, and the warden has to sign off on that, and then it goes eventually to Springfield. These grievances are lost, thrown away. Sometimes the people collecting the grievances are the people that you're filing grievances against. It's just a system set up for failure. On the off chance that your grievances are actually exhausted and you're actually able to file a lawsuit, the damages, if an attorney wanted to represent a prisoner after they've exhausted their administrative remedies, prisoner rights is the only area of civil rights law where you're not guaranteed attorney's fees. If you file a lawsuit for a police brutality claim, so to speak, and you win at trial, attorneys are guaranteed reasonable attorney's fees, and those, there's a system for determining that whatsoever. But it's like a range of $250 to $350 an hour. Not in prisoner cases. Attorneys are only allowed to get 150% of whatever the prisoner got in damages. So, for example, if a prisoner got $1, attorney would only be able to claim $1.50 in attorney's fees. These are systems that are set in place in the law to make it as hard as possible for prisoners to vindicate their rights. On the other end, sometimes, once in a while, they're successful. But the law itself is not the end-all, be-all. It has to be a grassroots movement to disable the system, period. Me and Greg are involved with this group called United Voices for Prisoners. It's a Latino organization where Latino family members get together and they try to effectuate change. A lot of their family members are incarcerated in different maximum security prisons in Menard, Pontiac, Stateville. But this is a form of organization where community members are getting together and they're basically like, look, enough's enough. We want to effectuate change. How do we do it? Can we go to the law? And we tell them, at these events, like, yeah, we'll teach you the law. The law is flawed. What the biggest avenue for change that you guys can do is actually get on the phone or go to these prisons and actually protest for your family members. Just a quick example, there was we helped a prisoner in this group. He wasn't getting his literature. He wasn't getting educational materials that his mother was sending in. I could file a lawsuit. First he has to exhaust administrative remedies, which would take 6 months, and then I could file a lawsuit, and that could go a year to 2 years. I told the mother this, and the mother instead called the warden. She called the warden nonstop. One call every 5 minutes.
Wow.
Monday, what's up, Friday? And the beauty of it is that she doesn't speak English. She said, libro, the book. And he got his members that we're helping right now that started this group staged a hunger strike for their conditions, to fight these conditions. A week after that hunger strike, the prison, IDOC, Illinois Department of Corrections, found the leader who organized this hunger strike and moved him to a prison in California. And everybody else were sent to different prisons, Menard. I mean, this all started at Stateville Correctional Center, which is like 45 minutes away from Chicago, the closest prison to Chicago. They know that this is their biggest threat. Lawsuits take time. Community activism, I mean, it does take time, but it's an immediate threat in their face. Like, file a lawsuit, you gotta do the discovery process, you gotta go through hoops, rigmarole, et cetera, and maybe after 6 months, maybe if you're lucky, you'll see a result. Whereas if you have prisoners in your face, striking, hunger striking, or staging riots, whatever, you have immediate results in your face. That to me, I think, is the key. If you have a plan to dismantle this system that starts with the law and includes community activism on the outside, community activism on the inside, all three of these things together, a three-pronged approach, I think is the only way to dismantle the system. And to realize that this isn't a system, like my fellow panelists were saying, this is not a system that can be, quote-unquote, fixed. It's got to be dismantled. This is a system of state terror, of state violence. I see it with my clients. Unfortunately, I see it on the outside, as not on the inside, obviously, but it is something that we need to take apart bit by bit because innocent people's lives are being destroyed. Just to give you like a quick story about this, I worked at prison law office in Berkeley. I was an intern, and we were interviewing different people for a class action lawsuit in California, and we had a prisoner who was complaining about inadequate dental care, but we didn't know exactly what he was complaining about. So we had a personal interview one-on-one. Just to give you a little background, this prisoner was labeled the most violent prisoner in prison. He had put 3 guards in the hospital. He had death tattooed to his neck. And he had to be led in by 3 different guards, shackled to his wrists, hands, feet. And he was talking about how he had a filling that fell out before he got into jail. And when he went into jail, he asked to have the filling put back in. And the jail said, that's not even an option. We'll pull your teeth out, but that's all we got. The guy's like, you know what, fine, I'll bid my time. I'll wait until I go to prison where they actually have better dental care, unfortunately, which is interesting in California. But something happened with his criminal case. It dragged on and on. The pain was excruciating. He's like, you know what, pull the tooth. The regular dentist wasn't there for his operation. It was a little Filipino woman who was about 5 foot, who had to climb on his chest to pull the tooth. So she's yanking and pulling, and finally you hear a loud snap or a crack. And she's like, all better? He was in excruciating pain. So then he put in, in California, it's an appeals process, they put in an appeal for medical care, emergency medical care, and he got seen 2 weeks later. And the dentist went up to him, she's like, and as soon as he took a look at his face, he's like, I'm not touching you. Why? That lady broke your jaw, bro. She yanked on the tooth so much that it popped the jawbone out of his jaw. He's like, well, you're gonna fix it, right? Hell no, I'm not gonna touch you, or else I could be sued for malpractice. Wait, you're gonna, wait. You're gonna let me stay here in pain. My tooth is out of my jaw. Just for the hell of it, the guy took his card out, put it on the table, was like, here, sue me, roll the dice. Who are they gonna believe? Somebody with death tattooed to their neck, or a medical professional? This guy was so violent, supposedly, that the only sharp object he was allowed to have in his cell were his reading glasses. In order for him to eat a sandwich, he had to push the bone back into the jaw for each individual bite. Push, chew, push, chew. Now the worst thing about this is that he came to us as if this was just a regular problem. He's like, you know what? I mean, this is a prison system. It's fucked up. I mean, nothing really I can do about it, right? I mean, I have a doctor telling me that he's refusing to care. I'm just gonna bid my time and wait till I get out. Me and the attorney were like, hell no. Here's a form. Here's how you can exhaust your administrative file a lawsuit. Don't let them get away with this. But it's this systemic, this systemic idea that they push into you that, I mean, prison is there to break you. And this guy was almost broken to the sense of like, this is normal to him. This is normal parts of this system. And to me, that's unacceptable. Thank you.
Well, I think that was an excellent presentation from the panelists, and I want to hear from people here. You know, maybe if I don't know if people need a microphone. I probably really don't need this microphone, but you know, look, we want questions, criticism. You can tell us we're full of complete shit, but you know, constructively, please. You know, ideas. What do people here feel that they can do to be part of this? Because it has to. And I know people are working on this. It needs to get connected on. And I do know that the Guild has a mass incarceration committee, of which I've had some relation to, and maybe Nora would like to speak about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out to everybody, if you heard this panel today and you feel like you want to be part of the Mass Incarceration Committee, find out more about what we do, please talk to me. We have a meeting tomorrow. I know it's kind of late in the convention. It's at 2 p.m. in room Metro 1-2. And I think we, as members of the legal community, really have a responsibility that's not being fulfilled to people in prison. And I would invite you guys to, like, the Mass Incarceration Committee needs you, needs new leadership, new ideas for how we are going to take on this new system. So thank you, panelists.
And the one suggestion I have, and people can tell me if I'm totally off this, why the Guild should be a signatory to the Month of Resistance. People here individually should be, but the Guild itself should be a signatory to this Month of Resistance.
Sorry, I'm going to pass around the sign-up sheet if you would like to be on a list.
That too. Okay, other questions? This brother David, who I know is from Canfield, Ferguson.
Hello, I just wanted to say thank you guys. You guys, this is an eye-opener. I appreciate you guys letting me record this. I'll make sure that this discussion gets to the people of the streets, the people, we the people. Because, you know, quite frankly, the reason why I came, and I'm glad I ran into you guys, because on the mainstream media, okay, they are listing you guys as a radical group. And I knew that they was lying because they did us in my community. We started a neighborhood watch, and we getting cameras out to the neighborhood, you know, Lord willing, next week. But what is happening is that we are relying too much on the media, and I believe that the mainstream media needs to be boycotted. I think that we, just like you said, we have to attack this thing on all levels. You know, to piggyback on what the brother was saying about, you know, this mindset that, you know, this should be acceptable, and that, you know, when they put labels on different people, it does affect them. You know, I was incarcerated, so I understand what the prison system is about. And if we look at in comparison to what's happening in the streets as what's happening in the prisons, it's 10 times worse. You know, it's because they don't have nobody. Like we getting ready to have these chest cams, and we're trying to get the word out, and it's hard. But you have people in prison, like he said, that they do not have no grounds to fight for them. So if nobody comes in there to ask them what's going on, this, that, and the third, then all of their rights and all of the things that they have access to, they have no idea that these things exist. And to end, because I want to make sure everybody talk. Last thing I would say is that we have to, like, we have to, as a community, as the different age brackets, need to come together with the information so that the next generation can pass on to the next generation. I myself, between the age, I'm 34, so I'm raised in between the ages of 30 and 40. So we are the ones that's coming up behind you guys, and we need that information. So as we get aware of what's going on, we can start pulling up these young teenagers, these guys that's 24 and 25 years old, and informing them of their rights, so that as they get older and as they get more mature and understanding the system, then they can teach the younger generation. Because there is a disconnect between the grown adults and then the children. And the reason why that those guys acted how they acted, because the leadership did not inform anyone of what was going on. So I think that we have to, like I said, make sure that everybody gets this information. So I'm just going to stop right there. But thank you guys again, man. Y'all was beautiful.
I just want to say one thing on that. Yes, I was one of the outside agitators. Look, there is a class struggle going on in Ferguson. Anybody who thinks that there's just some monolithic group there who has all the answers there and is dictating what's happening, frankly, either you're an opportunist or an idiot, because no grouping of people are monolithic. There are different views of what should happen. There's different programs and lines on the scene there. And, I was out there. I probably was in some pictures you might have seen that have been on some of the newspapers. Someone who looks suspiciously like me, anyways, in case there's any FBI agents here. In any case, look, we were there.